heard Stoa before?
Mm-hmm.
Something about a room. What is it, Stoa? Taking a porch. Okay.
Hi, how are you?
So what are we going to be talking about today?
Today we're going to be doing a hot seat.
I began to understand their side.
Watch people think out loud. Watch the people you respect actually think out loud.
Here's what colloquia allowed me to do. It allowed me to see myself as a philosopher for the first time ever.
You begin from this place of, it's not my position that matters, right? It's representing the other one that matters most.
And then we would challenge him as a group. But then we would hear him reverse the role too.
What's good, everybody? Welcome to today's Stoa on social media. So today we're going to be exploring the question of whether or not social media has been beneficial to society. Obviously, this is a technology that's become extremely pervasive throughout all of our lives, especially over the course of the last 10 years. But with that comes many questions that one must ask. So has social media influenced the way we communicate with each other? Has it influenced, say, our political conversations online? Has it negatively contributed to, say, like the amount of polarization we experience? Has it changed the things that we prioritize? Has it changed the way we see ourselves? Does it pose any negative mental health ramifications? And if it does, whose responsibility is it to regulate that? Is it up to parents to say, hey, my kid can't use this technology until a certain age? Does that cripple your kid in any way, especially when it comes to the emerging online market? Or is it up to the government? Can the government step in and say, hey, the technology that you guys are creating is extremely addictive and is not contributing to the well-being of society at large? In fact, it's negatively impacting everyone. Or is it up to the free market? Is it up to the individual? Is it all of our own responsibilities to say, hey, if this is bothering me, or if this is causing, like, say, depression or anxiety or some type of instability, then is it up to me only to say, hey, I should not use this? Is that even possible if it is addictive? But on the other end, is it beneficial? Is this the first time that we've become so deeply interconnected that all of us can communicate with each other across the world? We're now having global conversations because of this. Even like, say, COVID-19 that we're experiencing today, right? Would we have known about this so quickly had it not been for people posting things online? Is it lucrative? Can somebody, say, in the middle of nowhere, create something as benign as a cat page on Instagram and make, revenue based on advertisements? Is it just like this beautiful opportunity like Gary Vee seems to communicate? Or is it something that's genuinely dangerous? All these questions we're going to explore today. So Jonathan Dylan Karten is our moderator. He likes to go by Jay Dilly or Dill Pickle, I guess. And me and Brucker are going to be on the red team, blue team. So the sides are going to be basically split into, one is going to be pro, saying that social media is beneficial to society and it's something that we should not heavily regulate. The other side is saying, no, social media does have negative health ramifications and it is something that should be regulated, or at least understood at a minimum. Just to go over the rules really quickly, there are no ad hominems. So we will attack the argument, never the person. We will maintain anonymity, meaning that at no point throughout this conversation should you know what we actually think. If you guys do hear us say occasionally, like, I think, or I believe, or I disagree, just take that as a form of semantics. It's not reflective of our actual opinion. No monologues. Hopefully all of our arguments were concise, to the point, and not jabbering on for forever. And then maintaining the steelman. So this is important. Well, steelmanning is, again, representing the argument in its strongest conceivable form. That doesn't just apply to you communicating your side, but also when you respond to the other side. Represent to what they're saying in their strongest form. And then respect the moderator. Obviously, we love Jonathan. This is not typically a problem for us, but obviously when you have difficult conversations, this can be something that must be considered and at least reminded of. So anyway, let us know what you guys think. Peace.
All right, welcome to Stoa, where we talk about the interesting things that matter to you. We have here Prakhar Gupta.
In the blue corner, weighing 240 pounds.
Prakhar Gupta is studying psychology at Columbia
240
University.
pounds.
I just made that up. That's what I remember.
also-
He doesn't know pounds. He only knows kilos.
No, pounds are 4.5. That's the multiplicative inverse.
You're thinking of
Pounds
stones.
is a currency that they use in the UK.
That's 100 rupees a pound.
Pound is when you hit somebody and it shows up on the scring in Tekken.
Pound is a
This is what it is.
subcategory.
Intellectual Tekken. Let's go
Pound
pound for
is
pound.
a subcategory of Pornhub, #pound, and adding ing into it. And Perry Sidhu. Good segue, right?
Speaking of pounding.
Pound is going to happen to me after I'm done moderating. Perry Sidhu is an amazing man. He's studying philosophy at Columbia University. He's also our CEO of Stoa and an incredibly fun guy to speak to, if I do say so myself.
Oh, flattery.
So without further ado, you guys know the rules. I'm going to present a certain subject and both sides of it. I will flip a coin. Heads, Perry decides. Tails, Prakar decides. Are we ready?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. I feel good about this. This subject is going to be health ramifications.
Oh, by the way, let's remove the sides. Let's just say heads, I am pro,
Okay.
whatever you decide, and then tails, Brucker is pro, whatever you
Okay.
decide.
All right. So the first
And so
question.
we're going to toss, just to get it clear, we're going to toss a coin individually for each subject.
That's
or
correct.
just we're going to toss a coin once and we go on.
We'll do it individually.
I think it'll be more
Yep.
fun.
Okay.
All right, so the next subject is going to be the health ramifications of social media. What part do we as a society play in preventing certain ramifications of social media? And what parts is it going to be essentially laissez-faire and not for us to decide? So the pro argument would be, hey, we have nothing to do. We should not mess with our social media platforms. The con is going to be, let's try to somehow regulate it. And I'm going to say heads is pro. And tails, or I guess the person gets to decide pro or tails as soon as I flip. Sounds good?
Yep.
Right? So everyone understands? Heads, Perry decides, pro or con, and it is tails, Prakar.
So I decide.
No,
side
Brucker
I'm-
is pro.
You're pro.
Tail means Brucker is pro.
Pro what?
So you would say that essentially it's a free market argument, right? That social media companies have the responsibility to regulate themselves. You let them participate in the market. You let the market forces demand.
So I basically say that it's not incumbent upon the social media organizations, companies to regulate anything beyond the certain point in which they're selfishly interested in.
Absolutely,
Roughly, right?
yep.
Is that fair?
So my position would be that there are adverse effects of these social media platforms, and they should take that into consideration when propagating their technology out to the masses. Okay.
All right. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I can begin. I would say that social media has created a attention economy. So this attention economy maximizes for the amount of time that you're stuck on their screen. That has significant amounts of health consequences, but more importantly, it prevents people from actually doing things that matter or are interesting to them. So on their deathbed, they might say something like, I've spent this many hours on Instagram versus I could have spent this many hours like having quality interactions with the people that I love.
Okay. I like the idea of attention economy. I'll be fair, right? But I do not think it's a modern manifestation. I think economy has been attention based for pretty long, and by that what I mean is wherever the producer chooses to place attention, the consumer will place attention, and wherever the consumer places attention, the producer. It's a law of demand and supply. No problem. What technology has allowed us to do, rather, has been the ability to scale this leverage. It is not an attention economy, it is an economy of infinite leverage. And the cost we pay to maintain infinite leverage is the eliciting of attention, right? So I do not think it's, first, a modern problem. I think it's an age-old problem. I think the right way to address stuff like this, which is essentially mimetic build-ups in our society, memes that build up in our society that sort of destabilize our societies, is never top-down, is always bottom-up. It's the society's responsibility to adapt to what is present. Because let's be real, and this is an aphorism, a heuristic that I borrow, but it's sort of like energy can never be created nor be destroyed kind of a thing, where this has been latent all throughout. It was always sort of our job to adapt to its manifestation. We're just late. You can't blame people who are playing by the rules for something that is incumbent upon all of us.
So I agree that the vast majority of our economy is an attention-based economy, even though I think there's deviations there. But the technology that we have today, specifically social media platforms, have exponentially increased the degree to which they can optimize for viewership. So much so that people will spend countless hours on one app versus in the past we might be, utilizing a commodity or an item or going somewhere or purchasing something, which is a one-time every once in a while use. Now we're sitting here continuously staring at one thing, and they maximize for that. So the fact that Facebook is blue, for example, again, keeps us awake, right? So blue light grabs attention. It lowers the melatonin production. You also get things like dopamine hits for likes. So what they're doing is actually psychological manipulation fundamentally.
Again, I do not see this to be a modern manifestation at all. Go back to newspapers, go back to fake laughter in sitcoms in the 80s and the 70s. The whole idea was for you to stick around passively. It's really just like the motif for what culture serves for us. It's this like, you laugh for me.
So you said something interesting. You said playing by the rules. The rules are essentially now based on addiction, has some sort of guidelines. So if I just want to make a little corkscrew in this conversation, let's think about the ideas of the SEC or other regulations, like, for example, on addictive drugs. Is there a certain point where the technology that we've created is no longer within this paradigm of playing by the rules?
So yeah, I know, and I also foresee what anybody's response will be to the opposition of what I'll say, and that will be basically they will try to equate the costs of losses in the financial markets versus the costs of losses in information-based free product markets. And I don't think that's a fair equality to create at all. I think the reason why you need SEC, which is essentially a boundary around the financial playing field, is because there are heavier losses worth people's lifetimes. On the internet, however, which is like your town square, which is like Times Square, but for everybody, for anybody to tell me what I can or cannot do, when I'm allowed to destroy my life with tobacco, for anybody to tell me what I can or cannot do on the internet, first is an infringement on my private space to operate the way I want, and what I meant by rules was not essentially regulatory rules. I mean just the systems of our being, democracy, capital. They're playing by the rules. They're playing democratically and capitalistically, right? And so it's an infringement upon their privacy to operate in the capitalistic paradigm the way they want to, and on mine to do whatever the hell I want.
But I think it's a false analogy, because we're not telling the consumer to adapt their behavior, even though if a consumer has mental impairments, they will be prescribed these modalities, which is limit the use of these technologies. What you're doing is you're telling these companies that what you're creating is detrimental to society at large. And as a result of that, you should mold your behavior to create a more prosperous society, which is exactly what the SEC was doing. The SEC outlawed profanity because they wanted to maintain the ethos of the nation. They wanted to maintain these cultural barriers that they established, which contributed towards prosperity. Now, we have no regulations when it comes to social media. We have these arbitrary ones when it comes to things like nudity, right? But the more we understand the human brain, the more we can optimize for these triggers that induce this desire to continuously participate in what they're creating. So what I think you're doing is you're taking the free market example, but you're grazing over the immense magnitude of severity that has been created based on this technology.
And again, I do not see that being a modern manifestation at all. Think of anything that can keep you on the social hook. Anything at all, right? The compulsion to go to a party can keep you on the social hook. And even though the effects are not significantly at scale in comparison to what social media does, even a telephone. Having a telephone means constant anxiety. The telephone companies should do something so that we don't have constant anxiety about it, right? I do not think that sustains as an argument.
But I think that's a slippery slope fallacy.
No.
It's also a false equivalence.
But I think, hold on. And I think that's exactly this idea that now that we understand how the human brain operates in opposition to an environmental stimuli, we should do something about it, is exactly the kind of stuff that tropes are made out of. This is exactly where it slips to digital control and stuff like that.
Sorry to interrupt, just a clarification. You were saying SCC, it's the FCC that limited profanity, the Federal Communications
FCC,
Commission.
yeah.
The SCC is for the federal,
That's right.
the government, financial institutions.
That's right, yeah. No, but even in that place, right? Like, one, I don't think that there's any reason to equate all these technologies as the same thing, even from cell phones, right? But your cell phone, again, participates in the same market. However, they focus on app creation and then app optimization. Now, these creators of these apps, they optimize in a manner that transcends all the other capabilities that other technologies have for viewership, for grasping somebody's attention. And it comes at a cost. So let me outline these costs, right? We are experiencing a epidemic of depression, of anxiety, of hyperstimulation. You can even call it of the amygdala. But people are continuously anxious, and not just all people, specifically young people that are experiencing these technologies for the first time. You're just handed a phone when you're a kid. You're handed this technology, and it is not something to be taken lightly, right? So you can also say that it's a responsibility of the parents. However, they will be exposed to this regardless, right? You could say the same thing as pornography. They're going to find it, they're going to use it, and they're going to explore. They're also going to become addicted. Why not create regulations for these companies to address this hyper addictive behavior?
Okay, there's two parts to it. The second one being, why not tell companies to do something? The first one being just the basic structure of the whole thing. So let me talk to the first one. And to assess the worth of anything, a technology, any innovation, you have to sort of, and there is an end that Adam Smith would say is the free market invisible hand that is deciding for you. But let's consider it in a more rational, more tangible term. And I think that tangible term is a benefit minus cost benefit analysis. And so a child who's handed a phone at the age of 4 is not just handed the anxiety, but the endless possibilities that come with it. And what that goes on to say is that it's on one conceptual level of analysis, you have to understand the human brain. On the other, you have to understand the prosperity of society and the rapid pace at which something like social media perpetuates the prosperity of society, where say I have a genius idea that systemic measures would not allow me to bring out. I can do it by myself on a common town hall meeting that we've created out of nowhere at all. So to the first degree, I think it is evidently clear that there is more benefit than there is costs to social media. And part of the reason is, and as for the second part, which is what should we tell social media companies to do, is a slippery slope as soon as we allow them to synthetically manufacture our interaction with information in any sense. To whatever degree they're doing is incorrect anyway. To whatever degree you give them permission to do is stepping on dangerous ground. And the grander argument being that this idea that social media is a malaise comes from a place of unrestricted consumption, irresponsible engagement with the town hall. So if you were hanging out in the middle of the fucking town back 100 years ago, you were wasting your life with as much anxiety and as much nothingness as you might be doing with social media. It's just made Times Square more accessible to everybody and anybody. If you operate from a producer mindset, from somebody who's trying to gather leverage instead of pay attention, it changes the game. And that's what people who've been successful, and it's undeniable that it's coming. So,
well, even then, so I disagree that it's actually more beneficial than it is detrimental, mainly because there's this illusion that's created that the one thing that comes out of these social media ideas is that you'll become famous or you'll gain a following on these social media platforms, which is a small minority of the users that are actually on it. People also think that, like maybe this is a networking opportunity. There are actually plenty of other platforms where you, instead of like say Instagram, for example, there are plenty of other platforms where you can utilize that to propel your business. You can also use social media specifically pertaining to your business. However, the vast majority of users are not doing that. It's kids with accounts that are trying to get famous. And that is now their ideal. Their life ideal is to become famous via these apps, which can absolutely be replaced by something else. Now, there's also the example that you gave of whether or not to tell these companies what to do, right? So any new innovation, you're correct, right? It just kind of sweeps the market, especially if it's beneficial. But we only realize the ramifications of these technologies post. So we created cars and we're like, this is a great idea. We'll just throw them on roads, right? They're going all over the place. We make them faster. We realize, oh, people are going to crash. How do we make it safer when people crash? We put seatbelts in. Even those regulations took 10 years to establish a seatbelt, right? But then even that we started adding upon that. We added airbags. We added mandatory regulations for these car companies to meet a criterial minimum when it comes to safety. Now, the same thing applies to mental health. The problem is it's so difficult to quantify what is a mental health impairment and what is causing suffering versus like an arm injury we can clearly identify. So there's plenty of evidence saying that all of these emotional issues are on the rise, and on the rise in one population, and that is heavy users of social media. Sure. Now, that doesn't mean that the only reason that they've ended up this way is because of social media, but it's also reasonable to consume that it's a huge contributing factor. Therefore, I would say that many companies are doing this kinda. Google's now hiring philosophers, right, to allow them to, what's their motto? Don't be evil, right? To not be evil, to like contribute to the well-being of society, which I think is, no.
It's just not philosophically sound. But to respond to that, and I think this would be a plug and then we can move on to the next.
Right.
Here's the idea. I think the reason why social media breeds anxiety is because it finally gives you an opportunity to do what you truly want. I think this desire to be famous, what desire for recognition is Hegelian and in evolutionary theory, you want status games and so on. All this is latently existing. But, and there's a big but, how you were allowed to settle this battle of status, this battle for eliciting cooperation, for rising up, was through far more dangerous means, like the gladiatorship. You have to fucking give a life or take a life to finally be established as a hero. Now we simplified and smoothened the process out. Right, but in that process, what we also did was democratize the possibility to everybody. Now, you don't have to be a man, a specific age, with a specific build to do that. Anybody can do that. And I think it's basically playing to what is a natural desire for us to be found out. And we softened the fall with that stuff.
I would agree with that because that's actually a really novel way of approaching this. However, it's not built on anything tangible. The reason that gladiators were glorified is because it is, one, an example of the human potential of you being able to conquer your body and conquer the essence of another person. There was also a high demand for people that were physically capable and physically inept. We're also primates, right? We have a whole evolutionary structure built upon this. That is something in the external world that could be of benefit. You could
The same can be said for entertainment popularity.
No, but I would say that those people, those gladiators, now translate in today's world in sports, right? So there's an absolute a market. The more you increase your skill, you're able to, transcend and then make a living based off of this. It also contributes to well-being. If you look at how these athletes are operating, right? They're fit and they're healthy. Now, when it comes to social media, it's a complete illusion. It's a total facade. If you have like say 100,000 followers, right? But all you're posting are pictures of your dog, right? Now, you could say like, okay, now there's opportunity for marketing your dog, but even then, you're going to be constantly bouncing off your self-worth based off of something as arbitrary as likes. It's not other people's perception of you, it's your perception of yourself.
One final response, and then I want to change it up a bit so we can hear some more arguments.
Sure, yeah. I think you were undervaluing the importance of entertainment in our evolutionary history, right? To say, maybe gladiators were not a fair comparison. Maybe court jesters and court poets were a fair example, right? People like to be entertained, especially in whatever is happening in the rest of the modern world, where I just need a reason to vicariously export myself out of my reality, and there is a massive demand for that. So I don't see the point in glorifying, let's say, armed conflict of any nature. I like to say that this is part of our evolutionary nature and therefore must be carried out. I think entertainment's as much part of our evolutionary nature, and it's more prosperous to carry out.
So we're about to switch it up and have people take the opposite opinion of what they priorly had, but I just want to clarify the question before we go forward. We've gotten to the point where we realize that can is something that's very possible. We're the people that put these things into law. So can is something I don't want to really look at. I want to look at should we do these types of things? Now, the gladiator and the court jester example has had some sort of restrictions, right? If the court jester says something not funny, the king can kill him. If the gladiator, he gets to choose what is the okay weapon for the gladiator to be able to use. Even the tobacco example has, at the age of 18, they can purchase tobacco. Prior, they can't. They're 21 now. So now I want a bit nuanced. Flip the argument, meaning you take the pro, you take the con. However, at this point, I want to include the possibility of slight revisions, slight regulations, age restrictions, like in our prior examples.
Okay.
And are we arguing along the same question? Are we moving forward?
We can either argue along the same question if you feel like you have more points, or we can move forward to the idea of social media.
No. We'll stick with the flip. So You take the position that I just had. I think we have been doing should rather than can, but you can start from there, and then I'm gonna see if I can come up with different novel arguments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to directly respond to myself. Because we have a certain biological, psychological, hormonal bandwidth does not mean that it should be exploited for the cost of some material stockholder benefit, some weird capitalistic enterprise. You can use it. There is a certain part of your labor, 8 hours a day, that you're happy using your time and your energy on making things. That's fine. But to exploit the fact that my oxytocin can be pushed beyond a certain level by constantly posting or allowing people, giving a people platform to post pictures of dogs, is at a certain point going to have very deterministic biological, hormonal, neurophysiological implications. And I'm fine with social media doing its job, but at the point where it switches on to optimize for the expansion of those biological bandwidths, I think is pretty bloody evil, and evil that we haven't just societally uncovered yet.
Well, we could even start with the dog example, right? Now there are people in the world that have endless amounts of opportunity to make money off of literally anything, right? You purchase a dog, that's your pet, you have, like this lovely bond with it. But if your dog can gain popularity, you can make your entire livelihood off of something that takes as little time as posting videos on Instagram. This allows people that are traditionally low skill and have a difficult time transitioning to high skill to transcend their socioeconomic status. Now it's about creativity. Now it's about how can you tap into this market in a very unique way or present something that's even already there, but improve upon it slightly. And you can absolutely change your life. Now, anyone, anywhere, right, has the opportunity to make money. Now, anyone, anywhere has the opportunity to do anything with whatever idea that they have. The possibilities are absolutely endless. Now, when it comes to the detrimental side effects, I think this is something that you alluded to earlier, but I'll stamp on it, is the necessity of your own individual responsibility. You sign up for these apps, you use these apps, you purchase the phone. When it comes to parents, if parents have any inkling that this is detrimental to their children, then for sure, don't allow them to use it beyond a certain age, right? But what we do is parents take the easy road, where they don't want to, give the kids the attention that they demand. Instead, they'll put on a TV show, or they'll just hand them an iPad and then, let them go, and they're sedated for a little bit, right? So as far as what I mentioned earlier, where this problem exists with a specific subset of the younger population, I think that's just the misattribution of responsibility.
So it seems as though this question hinges on the fact of whether the individual has the proper capacity to self-regulate. Does the society have the ability to self-regulate, or is it somebody else's higher responsibility to regulate the market, the government? And just to go on your the parents' tangent we went on, do parents know enough about the detriments of social media for them to make the proper condition, or is this something else where the market and the government has to get involved?
So here is what I think, and I think I did not do a good enough job at making this case the first time around. I don't think this is a matter of consideration for the individual because of the pervasiveness of this. This is like saying, let's see, we are going to get electricity for everybody around the world with nuclear fission. So this is no longer a matter of your individual adaptation because you multiply. So here's how you think about it. A society adapting is one big adaptation. Every individual adapting is one adaptation compounded by one adaptation compounded by one adaptation, which is essentially compounded to a 7.5 whatever billion. Is that the population of, right? So it's a massively adaptive process. I think what your view of the entire phenomena is selectively innocent, and the reason why I think it is the case is that this is a society-wide injection, and it should be considered at the conceptual level of the society itself, not at the level of the individual. And in that, allowing people, low skill or high skill, to make money in whatever form or fashion possible is fine. You benefit somebody, brilliant, right? You save the world entire if you save one life, that's Stoa, right? But if it comes at the cost of the mental peace of so many individuals, is it really worth it? But to that, you would say something like, again, it's the individual's choice. But you know why I think it's particularly scheming is because it's free. And as soon as it's free, your attention becomes the bloody product they sell, right? So the manufacturing of the entire design happens to keep you baited, to keep you on a Pied Piper trail. And I think that's where the scheming aspect is.
I wouldn't even allude to responsibility there. I would just point to what it's actually doing for society. I'm from a small town in the middle of Northern California where the predominant population is white, right? Without the advent of the internet, for example, I would only know what's in my small community. I would not know the experience of, say, Dominican people, which I was only exposed to since moving to New York.
Read books.
Even then, how many books can you possibly read to understand the magnitude of what culture entails?
Watch TV.
Even with films, right? You can only watch so many films. You're only likely to watch so many films.
I mean, it's the...
Wait, hold on, let me finish. Even then, you're going to select for what already aligns with your own narrative, right? That's a very common understanding in the psychological studies. So what social media has done to society at large is it connected everyone. Now countries are talking to other countries. Now cultures are talking to other cultures. Now people are exposed to people that they would never be exposed to in real time, in real life. A book is arbitrary. A book is very held at a distance.
I mean, are you telling me that anonymous reporting on Twitter is not arbitrary? But that's not
No,
the
but
general point.
even then, right? I'm pointing to the benefit in that.
That's my general point.
All these technologies, what they're doing is now you're exposed to the average person within these communities. Now you're exposed to the intellectuals within these communities. And now you have a proper understanding of who they are. I think that limits things like racism. I think that limits things like tribalism. I think it even goes against nationalism. Now the youth are having conversations about a collective, globalized society. The only reason that would be possible is because now they are so deeply interconnected.
No, I think so. Just a side note, I think the conversation about grand narratives that tie all of us together began with, and even pre-Marx, but really began with, we've had ideas to, create some kind of a globalized society for a very long time, right? And the whole globalization, the global village idea came pre-internet in its true modern nature too. But let me go back a little and let's see. So you point to the benefits that social media brings, and I comically respond with other places where you can draw the same benefits. And so what we sort of end up doing is localizing this one iteration on technological development with not just internet but social media on internet, and then we weigh the benefits and the costs of it. And so you say the same benefits that were present before have been made more efficient. I say the same costs that were present before have been made more efficient, and polarization is a brilliant example of that, right? There is no discussion about modern day political polarization without the involvement of social media. There is no election without the involvement of a foreign government. So it's made costs as efficient as well, and then added certain few individualized, localized costs that we are unprepared for. And it's not just depression and anxiety. I'm talking suicides. And Jonathan Haidt's research is profound on how particularly little girls between a certain teenage age are so drawn to self-harm and stuff because of the influence of social media. And like you cannot disallow people to play a game everybody else is playing. So you cannot be like, 12-year-old girls, you stay out of social media. It's a society-wide problem. It's not an individually selecting problem.
So about a year and a half ago, The Guardian published a paper, and the article was basically on the remarks of the ex-president of Facebook, Sean Parker. He said that the site was made to exploit human vulnerability, employing attention and addiction engineers in the creation of the site and its various graphic interparts. So my question, and I'm about to flip a coin and change it up a bit, is do you think that parents have the responsibility in the upbringing of their children from 0 to 100%? Or do you think that the government has the some responsibility to make sure that parents aren't harming their children, or if they to intercede when parents are not doing a good job? The basis of our community is based on the family unit, but do we trust the family unit in today's modern age to know all of the information that is out there regarding what's good and bad for children? Or do we feel as though the government has a larger role to play in today's version of society? Do you guys understand the question?
Yes.
I'm about to flip the coin. Heads is going to be able to say that the parent still knows best, mom, dad knows well.
Heads is me, tails is him. Let's
Right.
flip and then we'll decide.
Okay, ready? It is tails.
So you decide which side do you want to take.
You were the
Government knows best versus parent knows best in relation to the article.
Okay, so you assigned initially that parents know best.
Yes.
Okay.
So
So
parents know best. Okay.
yeah.
And it's not really parents know best, just for the sake of, from what I understand, and tell me if I'm incorrect, is the idea that parents have 100% responsibility over the children versus government has any responsibility over.
Yeah,
family
well, the
units.
parents have a primary autonomy over how they raise their children, and the government has a very limited right to interject.
It's like the
Those are
federal
the two
government
sides,
and the
yeah.
municipal government.
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
take the side that the government has at least minimum responsibility, and you take the side that the government has no responsibility. Are we clear?
That I was going to pose it separately, but we can do that as well.
No, I mean, tell me, how are you going to pose it?
And I was simply thinking that the parents have the enough information and enough understanding in today's modern day age. Let's talk just the United States to make it clear, such that they can take care of their kids and know everything that needs to be, and the government can be suggestive but not necessarily interfere. Directive versus the government needs to interfere like they do with the FDA and other forms of society. When it comes to specifically children, because again, these social media platforms are most susceptible and do the most harm to children.
Is the more succinct way of saying it is that should there be regulation on social media or not from the government side?
No, I'm looking more at the responsibility and whether the person has enough agency to make the decision or whether the parent doesn't. You can talk about licenses for having
You want to
kids.
just go off and see where it goes?
Yeah, let's just try it.
Yeah, yeah. If you don't like it, we'll change it up.
Okay, so when it comes to parents,
They have full autonomy?
there are many different philosophies that parents embody when it comes to parenting their children. It is, again, nobody has the child's best interest in mind more than their parents. And I'm not talking about the outliers. I'm talking about the vast majority. They will do what they feel is best for them. And that includes, giving them what they think will give them a leg up in life. Now, if a parent were to say, you cannot participate in these technologies, you can't use a computer, for example, what you're doing is you're making this child illiterate when it comes to...
The only form of literacy in the future.
Exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So if you operate from that place, you realize that, one, parents should be able to make this choice. Also, they're continuously around the child. So if they notice any abnormal behaviors, they can adjust and adapt from there. It's also an effective form of discipline. So if you can limit a child's use of these technologies based upon how they're performing in school or what they're doing in their home environment. So if you leave the autonomy with the parents, I think that's absolutely beneficial. But when you leave it with the state, I think what happens is you impose something that the state, one, does not have eyes on and should not have eyes on. I think it's a deeply slippery slope. Obviously, this doesn't apply to when you're like harming your child. And that's the only barrier that we put in place since then.
Social media can be seen as harming your child.
I think
Or benefiting your child. I think that's a quick, right? But let's please go on.
I'll leave it there. Let's start.
Okay, let's see. I had a thought in my mind. Jonathan, come on. Let me give it a shot. Let's just. Here is what I think. Okay. Yeah, I know. Okay. In the face of the Great Depression in the 30s, when the predominant idea of the neoclassical economists was basically, don't worry, things are going to fix themselves. We have the mathematics, we have the geometrical graphs and so on. We were facing a terrible depression across the world when a certain Englishman, John Maynard Keynes, was spoken to about this. And somebody said, in the long run, everything's fine. He's like, also in the long run, everybody's fucking dead, right? So we need to do something. This is the
I think that was Malthus.
No, this is for sure Keynes. 1930s, Malthus was like late 1700s. But when Keynes said that, he made the perfect case for why government intervention, or let's just say a top-down intervention to a bottom-up phenomena, is important. And the reason is that sometimes things come on so quickly that they need to be at least, let's say, softened in their fall or heightened in their rise for them to work properly. It is that you let this new assimilation, this new integration, this new object in your environment be contextualized properly, slowly, safely, or fast, or hit, like basically a catalyst to one of the variety of change. That there is a role for a government to play the catalyst to one variety of change or the other at one point, at some point in time, especially when things are very rapid. And what social media has been an overload. It's like the floodgates of information went out, right? And everything's just fucking bathing in the tsunami of information. And parents who have lives of their own, who have shit to do, who have the children to raise in so many other ways than looking out for whether they're smoking cigarettes or whether they're drinking alcohol as a even though that's their responsibility, they just don't have the information or the ability to perceive or the ability to process that information. And when the scale of the problem is as big, at least for a short to medium run, until we understand this phenomena properly, until we understand the consequences and the implications of this phenomena to the T, because it could be disastrous, catastrophic, we must allow a regulation body to soften the assimilation of the new world, a virtual world unto itself, because it's not small.
So that's interesting. I would think that one immediate limitation that comes to mind is that there are so many different variations of these technologies that are being created every day that to immediately outlaw them until they're properly understood without a case study to kind of base this information upon is not practical. It's also detrimental to the economy.
Not outlaw, regulate.
Even regulate, right? What that means is disincentivize the use for a specific population, correct?
Mm-hmm, right.
Right. So That exists when it comes to
Smoking cigarettes.
but even then, that's handled by the Food and Drug Administration,
Right.
right? So we have an entire administration when it comes to
And
this.
we might need one for this. This is a bigger problem than cigarettes.
But even then, no, I don't think it's a bigger problem than cigarettes. But even
A
then,
more pervasive one. More users.
you could make that argument, but the harm is exponentially different when used.
The data is not clear. on
When
that yet.
used.
Right.
Oh,
Please
when
go
used,
ahead.
for sure. The reason I say that I think parents should be the ones with the final say is because what the government does, and this is more philosophical about the role of government than it is necessarily about social media and whether or not the government has a role in kids. But when you get the government involved, what the government does is they go directly to the company and they tell the company that this is the regulation that needs to be in place for this population. So now if you have alcoholic beverages, you will put an age limit on it. If you have cigarettes and tobacco, again, you have an age limit on it and you don't advertise it. When it comes to
I'll suggest a better one. Right. I'll suggest a better one that will be more reasonable, more moderate. You do not optimize your algorithms for likes. You don't optimize your algorithms for reaction. Right. That's a standard regulation. It can be traced with data mining and all that. So I mean, I'm not saying that you outlaw them. That's an extreme case. Neither am I saying you create age restrictions, which by the way do exist for all these platforms, at least informally. All of them ask you how old you are before you join, and do you understand the terms of agreement that nobody reads. Which, by the way, is another interesting point. The government can mandate a more concise version, link it to a more broad version, and have everybody read that so that people know what they're signing up for. They know that they're the product. Most people don't even understand in this free Instagram economy, they're the one being sold.
even then, right? So there are warning signs on literally everything that's harmful, including porn. So and nobody cares. Everyone lies too.
It does deter it. Like there is no denying on the evidence on cigarette packs. The images being larger reduce it. Not very
Actually, in
significantly.
other countries, when there's an image of somebody with like say cancer or like a tube in their throat on the pack, right? That deters only slightly.
Yeah, I know.
And even then, we write death in bold letters all over the cigarettes today, and it doesn't do much. But again, I think the problem lies in we live in a fundamentally capitalistic economy. So when you tell people not to optimize for likes, which is not to optimize for viewership, which is not to optimize for the amount of advertising revenue that they can make, you're telling a company that they should not optimize for profit.
No, it's like saying that
Meaning
you should
fail.
have 8-hour work weeks or work days, or saying that you cannot have sweatshops. It's basically saying, listen, you can run your capitalistic enterprise for profit. You just do not exploit on biological bandwidths of people. I think
But that's even then. One, we don't understand that. It's so ambiguous.
and that's why I say it.
But even, that doesn't mean that you put a preemptive no on it, right? What you do is, okay, if I guess I won't take the nuanced position. I'll take a harder position.
You're right.
What you're doing is fundamentally telling the company to fail, right? Now,
No.
for sure, and I'll tell you why. So the reason companies succeed and fail in today's world, at least in the United States, is based off the competitive market, right? So you have other companies competing with each other, and they will find what will allow them to topple up on the other companies. Now, we live in a global market when it comes to these technologies. So that means that these same regulations would have to apply to China, to India.
Absolutely.
If India were to come up with a TikTok, right, and they were to use the same psychological parameters to, propagate it to the US, we have no control
We
over
do that with financial action task forces all the time. We get compliance around the world through so many means. It's just a matter of whether we consider this to be some kind of a mental epidemic or not.
I think
as soon as we do.
I understand both arguments. I think we've touched upon them well. It would be a good time now to actually switch. Do you guys want to take a second?
No, I think I'll try it. I have one thought, so I'll
ahead.
explore that.
Okay.
So I now am defending why parents should decide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The reason I would say government should have a role, I would say a significant role, is because one, it's very difficult for parents to understand this technology because of how novel it is, because they have no experience with the technology itself, and they did not experience it in their childhood. So in their developmental years, they lived a pretty normal life, right? I guess our generation is the first generation where we had both in our developmental years. The generation after ours was fully immersed in these technologies. So parents, especially parents nowadays, would have a very hard time understanding exactly what it's doing to their child. In the same way that they would have a hard time.
You were forgetting that you were around the age where you start having kids. So
Oh no.
so I mean, the fact of the matter is that-
Shadi.com, check me out.
the fact of the matter is that we are in the age where we're going to be parents, in the sense that the real question or the real quandary applies to our children who are in the next 5, 10, 8 to 20 whatever years, right? So you have some experience. That the stage that you're arguing for is past.
Okay, let me also make another argument. Well, one, I think it applies to, at least you can exclude our generation. Look at other parents, right? So in the same case, I still think that argument stands. Wow, I was thinking of something else. What was it?
Let me try and answer, and
Yeah.
maybe you remember. Fair. My parents don't understand technology. You know who does? My younger cousin. You know who makes more money on the internet than I do? Him, not my dad, right? The very fact that so I think it is very safe to consider Facebook as a global Times Square. Think of it exactly like that, right? And it is that you are physically, even though on a 2D physical space, you are physically interacting with that environment. And a child who's raised in that environment, due to human flexibility, is far more adept than the parent is. The parent can keep his tradition, while the child can keep his modernity. And from that, a proper synthesis like it has will emerge, where the child knows how to make it profitable, the parent knows how to not let it be exploited.
Okay, I remember, and it actually ties into this perfectly. So,
Brilliant.
one, I think that there is this illusion that everyone is going to make some level of income when it comes to social media. The vast majority don't.
Not yet.
Well, I mean, that money doesn't work that way.
No, I mean, I'm pretty sure, or like, look at the rate at which brick and mortar businesses are going into ones and zeros.
Okay, but I get that, right? So it's a different conversation with teaching your children how to code versus teaching them how to be fluent in Instagram.
Oh, no. They're not very different. They're not very different.
Well, think of it like this, right? So there's always a technology that's going to replace a technology. There's always an app that's going to replace an app.
And it's going to look far more like Instagram than JavaScript screen.
We don't know.
Oh,
we don't know what it'll look like.
We are perfectly sure about that. Object level programming is the new in. It's always been fantasized about the fact that you could just take an object and place it somewhere where you design interfaces with your code instead of code.
But what I'm saying is, in the future, just even very relatively close, what it's probably going to look like, it's not an app on your phone, right, where you're putting up content. It's going to be a virtual reality space that you enter into. But hold on, I have a question. I want to know how you answer this.
Right.
We know that it's psychologically better for children to be children, meaning play outside, play with each other, play with their parents, for a significant portion of their development up into late adolescence, right? We also know that indoctrinating them into the educational system we have, where it's standardized testing, does not contribute to intelligence. What does is play, movement in space, exploration, right? And experimenting in nature, right? Socializing them from an early point. Now, what happens when you use these technologies is that, one, they're not socialized, right? They're socialized via this alternative interface. They don't go outside. They don't, play. They fundamentally do not play. And that absolutely impacts their development. So the reason I would say government should play a role is that these children are going to be the future leaders of the nation. And if you know that there's going to be an epidemic when it comes to the leadership of the nation in, say, 20 years, 30 years, right? The government absolutely should, on moral grounds, play a role.
You do not give due credit to the phenomenology of change in that argument. You imagine the world with incompetent leaders, but the world looks like this right now. No, it does not. So here's my argument. The real question is essentially this, do we humans survive the shift in our world from a real physical world to a virtual world with the same biology and psychology we have? If we do, I can totally see, because, okay, this is going to involve a few very, very long philosophical arguments, but long in the sense like they're long drawn. But the idea is that, you know how I mentioned gladiators and social media likes? The entire process has been to soften competition. Right? And we have managed to create the ultimate means of softening competition, that we take it virtual and we reduce it to meaningless numbers of likes, right? This phenomena, if it continues, what will really happen is we'll soften competition to a whole new degree of threshold where we are competing primarily in the virtual world. And the better my child is prepared from starting off with playing, exploring, interacting, because we don't know how this looks like. Listen, if you create a technology that allows me to make new video games on the fly, that is far more profound in exploration than the other one. But to cap that off, here is a very interesting implication. Andrew Yang fought his entire campaign on UBI, which is essentially this need because we are going to be technologically illiterate in the very near future. And one solution to UBI is retraining camps. And who are these retraining camps for? People who are not fucking involved with social media and the new generation of markets enough. The markets have shifted. Sex hunting places, primary biological drives have shifted. Everything, the ideas of God have shifted. You can find YouTube about you, like you want to listen to, you want to go to church, go on YouTube. Everything that is a major pyramid of our psychological reality has moved there. It is just our physical bodies. And if you take the simulation hypothesis seriously, maybe our physical bodies have been implanted into this virtual world too. The general point being, that is the progression of the world, to romanticize this real world exploration and play, which most likely is not going to be relevant in the near future. No point at all.
I would say on the same point, right? I would say that my position still stands, because say you want to optimize for one's ability to participate in these technologies in the future so that they are literate, they are competent, and they can succeed. What you would optimize for is individual ingenuity and creativity. Now, if you want to optimize for those two things, social media is not in that equation.
Social media is very much, it's
not in that equation when it comes to early adolescence development. Actually, it impairs it, right? What does propel this new creative desire is playing. It's fundamentally playing outside.
Yeah, but
it's with items. It's with things. The brain itself, right, is a movement mechanism. From what we understand very fundamentally and reductively, the brain is this organ that allows us to move in space. So to optimize it, you actually have to physically move in space in complicated patterns. You play sports, you learn an instrument, right? Now, introducing these technologies to a child that just learned to read, just learned to write, they will have no idea what to do. They can be creative in some novel ways, right? But if you instead hedge that against the fact that you can increase their level of potential creativity by just giving them a normal set of development, while you can continuously make them fluent in what it is.
Did you play football growing up?
Absolutely.
How good are you at coding?
Coding?
Yeah.
I've never tried it.
So exactly my point. Exactly my fucking point. So here's the deal, right? In the 70s, there was a lot of hue and cry about people spending more times with screens and all that jazz, and people not playing music enough. And then Jim Morrison comes to a gig high on LSD, and he's like, "Listen, in the future, all of us are going to be playing music out of computers, and DJs are the most earning musicians of our times." So the fact of the matter is, in this impairment experiment that you're taking, the reference of good or bad is the real world that exists right now. We want to prepare, like Yang says, our children for the real world that is going to exist 10 years from now. And by then, this also to the point of our brain being a motor system, it is because that is the only way we have up until to explore our reality. Our brain's not mathematical. It wasn't originally. We made mathematical models out of it, which are exploring reality without being motor about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same it's going to be with virtual.
We're getting too close to the end of our session here, and I want to ask one final question before we open it up in discussion. Excellent so far, by the way. I'm learning a lot. We have at the present time various things that are illegal for minors to do. Various things that we know does harm us.
Don't smoke weed.
Exactly. But it doesn't. But not all of the things harm everybody to the exact same degree. I mean, it is given that if you eat, if the FDA doesn't approve of a certain product and somebody eats it, they're going to, be ill, mad cow disease. It's also a given that if you smoke, you'll be able to be ill. Now, I understand that social media doesn't affect everybody in that same capacity. My question is, at what point does social media need to get to for it to be a critical mass? And then, what is the litmus test for us to understand that? Have we reached it already? Will we reach it? And then I'm going to open up to open discussion.
This might actually be interesting as an open discussion.
Okay,
let's do that.
Because,
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay. I'll make my case.
Because I think that point actually exists now.
No, I don't.
Why?
Because I think so. Tell me if I'm right. You were what you were imagining, to put it in x and y axes, is essentially a graph that goes up like this, exponentially rises, right? What?
I'm imagining a probability distribution.
No, not a probability distribution.
If you're smoking cigarettes, the probability distribution of you being hurt after a certain level is pretty close.
So
to
let's
accurate.
map.
Whereas is the same probability distribution the same for every single individual using social media?
So
Yeah.
So let's map it like this. Use of social media on the x-axis, health consequences on the y-axis. It goes something like exponentially rises, and you must have a cutoff point at which no more.
And everybody should be affected relatively equally.
But I think the way it happens is that it goes up straight like this and then comes down like this. So the idea is, so after a certain point, a certain peak is reached, it begins to the health implications, negative health implications begin to fall because you truly understand the nature of its consumption. You are not supposed to consume it indifferently and indiscriminately. You're supposed to consume it for a purpose appears to you the more time you spend on it. Think about it like this. The world's a huge place. The real world's a huge place. You may say staying outside or trying to learn something or trying to interact or explore your real reality after a certain point can be very, very consequential. You can get hurt, you can get car crashes and so on. Yes, but if you keep spending time in your reality enough, one, you will avoid those. Two, you will learn to select for what parts of those realities you want to interact with. Now, so I don't want you to limit the understanding of social media as just a platform. It's the virtual world. And if it's not it yet, even though it majorly is, it is going to be that. So this negative health consequence peaks, and it might be that we are around the time where it's peaking, but any place forward from here, these negative health consequences are going to go down because we're going to understand.
Let me touch on that, because I don't think they've reached their peak. I think they're still going to increase.
5 more years.
Possibly. I mean, probably 5 more years. But I think by then there'll be another innovation. What's happening with social media is that all these companies are still optimizing for viewership. Now, they've experimented with removing the like button, changing the color schemes, and they noticed that viewership goes down significantly, right? It's not in their interest to do so. Now, people that are discovering these negative health implications are not the social media companies themselves. There are psychologists that are reporting this massive data pointing to the fact that there's a specific population that's experiencing incredible, dense psychological impairments. The biohacking community is very interesting when it comes to this, because they're the ones that discovered that light, for example, affects your is received by the eye, and it affects your neurochemistry, right? So blue light keeps you awake, suppresses melatonin production. Red light kind of calms you down and sedates you. And that's to mimic like the light flow of the
morning and evening,
right? But it also impacts your circadian rhythm. So when you're looking at blue light all the time, you are destroying your circadian rhythm and rewiring it for something that looks like you're more awake at night. The biohacking community found this, and they said, okay, these people are experiencing these problems. I can't find solutions anywhere. Let's look at the literature. Then they started looking at how the eye receives these light. Then they started saying, okay, how do I optimize my use of these social media sites so that I can still participate, because all of them utilize these platforms to sell their business, without impacting my health negatively. And what they found was,
Cut it out. Huh? That's what they found. Cut it out. Dump this shit. There is no way around it.
I mean, I don't think there's a choice.
Yeah.
But what they found was you can put a red light filter on your phone, right? That'll dissuade you from using your phone in general, right? It's not an actual repellent, but it doesn't activate the addictive mechanisms. Meditation, right? You can set timers to use it in specific days where it actually matches with your neurochemistry. So for example, if you use it first thing in the morning, your mind is in a very subconscious state. This is Joe Dispenza, who Brucker now hates, but
I discredit him now. That's fair.
But
don't talk about quantum bullshit when you don't understand it.
I know. Anytime someone says a word quantum, I want to throw up.
There's very few people who can credibly say the word quantum and carry a conversation off.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those. I'm just,
I think Joe Dispenza is right about this. But what happens in the morning, right, is you're entering from a dream state into an awake state, and that period of time takes
some seconds.
Yeah. There's also this cortisol that's about to be released, right? That gets you propelled throughout your day. And also your insulin cycle is also tightly regulated around this. Now, if you go right to your phone right away, you're actually encoding that behavior, making you more susceptible to do it continuously. That's also why they say don't check your email first thing in the morning. It was not these companies. It was not the government. It was not psychologists. It was biohackers that pointed to this health ramification, and then they proposed alternatives.
And let's wrap up this point, because we have one last question. We have about 5 minutes before the
end. And as must be, right? Like when something new is introduced and a lion comes along, he's trying to fight me, my friend helps me. Like, that's the general way in which we organize ourselves. So I don't necessarily see that as a problem. But here's what's interesting, and this is speculative. Maybe you can tell me what you think about it. There's Facebook TV. There's Facebook Marketplace. There is a photograph stand on Facebook called Instagram. There is an instant messaging communication channel. This entire ecosystem that's being built almost under the wraps because we're focused on the wrong conversation. It sort of makes me think if the future of this shit looks like one day we unveil an Oculus headset and now I live in Facebook world. And it's not like I live there
There's
permanently.
screenshots.